You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one on one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical, tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com / apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com / apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1008. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. We've been doing quite a few series throughout this year. Earlier in the year, we did our New Year, New Habits way back in January. We wrapped up our 7-figure practice series after that. Then for a while, we just had a whole bunch of different types of episodes, kind of bringing in the spring. And then in May, we did our psychedelic assisted therapy series. So 10 episodes, interviewing people from MAPS, interviewing people that are part of all sorts of trainings and all sorts of ibogaine places and all sorts of ayahuasca discussions, really interesting things. Whether or not you're getting into that world, that's a series that I would say is definitely worth listening to because your clients are going to be asking about this. It's good to be knowledgeable whether or not you're in that work. It's important to know that, especially with most likely MDMA being reclassified in August of 2024, and a lot of the people we interviewed saying most likely psilocybin in the next couple of years, this is going to be something that people are talking about. And actually, back in episode 999, it was episode 1005. We had Keith Kurlander, who was talking about psychedelics as the 5th wave of psychotherapy. And so just making sure that you have access to this information, you're thinking through it, and that you're really digging into these areas that our clients want you to know and that are going to be asking your opinion on things. So I am so excited. Today we have Jessica Nichols as part of our Movers and Shakers series this summer. Jessica's a licensed clinical counselor specializing in complex trauma, supports fellow helpers to address symptoms and patterns that are hindering the pursuit of spacious and fulfilled lives. Through sustaining an ordinary solo practice, Jessica finds the freedom, flexibility, and life-giving energy to authentically show up as the human, mom, lover, friend, and community member she aspires to be. Jessica, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here too, and to have the main focus of the show to be on being human. So often we cover things on this show that are the business, the marketing, but if we don't go back to just like the heart of what we want, of loving what we're doing, both in life and in business and all over the place. Yeah, I think it's just so important that you're pulling us back to being human. So let's start with why have being human be the kind of core of today's show.
Yeah, I think what I find funny is that we're following a psychedelic series, and I've just found so many of my human experiences to be psychedelic, especially motherhood, um, and the real work of that is integration. And so, being human to me is kind of our purpose and our journey here. And I mean, this is going deep real fast, but um, I think that's kind of the just like really honored space that we get to be as therapists, is we get to be kind of those wise elders holding space for people as they journey back to themselves and back to
Mhm.
their humanity. And at least that's kind of the space that I'm holding
Yeah.
in my practice is just like let's reconnect to your humanity. And I like helping helpers because if we're not connected to our own humanity, um, we're less likely to help others connect to their humanity. So
Yeah.
that's why.
Now we dug into a lot of kind of the potential of plant medicine and things like that in that series. one question that often get from people that have not tried psychedelics or have not been a part of that work is like, why should you have to use something like that to find you being human again? Like, why should you have to use this? Some people would say drug. Other people might
Mhm.
not use it as like kind of aggressive of a term. But how do you respond to that in regards to how that integration has worked for you personally?
Yeah, I think the essence of what we've lost, and oftentimes this is through complex trauma, but there's so much under the complex trauma umbrella. And unfortunately, just especially in the state that we live in, it just comes from oppression and objectivity. And so now we see ourselves as these things or these to-dos, and we lose that okayness, or I think what a lot of psychedelic experiences kind of have this big essence of just like radical acceptance and love. And so I think that you know holding space for people, and one, holding space for yourself, and seeing yourself as this complex being, and seeing like the brilliant intention behind some of these personality traits or adaptive ways that we've made it through the world. Like, oh, now I have better affection and understanding of my productivity, but that's not who I am. And I mean, just being a mother, it felt like I had been like abducted. And I was like, what is this? But it's because I didn't start out with a very strong sense of like who I am, a sense of self, my own humanity. And it was through just kind of having to figure out how to love another being and love myself in that journey. Um, yeah, I mean, I didn't need drugs to intensify my experience. But
Hmm.
it was through that. What I truly deeply believe is that we all have kind of this innate love in us. We just disconnect from it. I mean, this is more complex trauma. We disconnect it to survive our environment. Um, and we disconnect from these authentic parts of ourselves, whether it's our sadness, our anger, um, these really vital pieces of who we are, as a way to adapt through our environment. And that then forms our personality and who we believe we think we are. And then something big may happen, or we just keep getting into the same stuckness or rut. And then it's like, wait a minute, there is more to me than, you know, I keep using productivity as an example, but there is more to me than this piece of me. So,
Yeah, it's
so
interesting
yeah.
because it's like, you think about even just a couple hundred years ago, how unsafe the world was, especially for females, for, people of color, minority groups, all sorts of, even just the working poor, just how unsafe it was, and how those that survived and that the evolutionary traits were passed on were often the ones that fought back. They just kind of like kept their head down, all these things that it took to survive that oftentimes are in very opposition to remembering who we are, remembering what it means to be human, remembering,
Hmm.
energy beyond ourselves. Those are things that are really hard to think about if you're at war, or if you're, in, extreme poverty, or, all sorts of things that have happened over, the centuries. And so it's interesting to just think about that, what you said about kind of returning back, or that we've forgotten. Can you dig into maybe times in your life that you forgot and then you remembered, and what that looked like?
Yeah, I think why motherhood specifically was just like such a mirror of what I was experiencing is um, oftentimes how we respond to our children is is pretty good evidence of how we were responded to as children. And so I dealt with a lot of rage early on, and it was just, well, this is my integration, is looking back. I just had such low capacity because, again, I thought I could do it all. I thought I could go to grad school and have two babies and put a lot of pressure on myself to be this specific um, business owner and wife. And so these rage moments would come in, and I was like, this doesn't feel like me. I'm a happy person. What is this? This isn't who I am. Uh, And so through therapy, through my own therapy, and at this time I was really working with internal family systems, I was sitting with this rage part of myself and recognizing, oh, this rage part just feels like a huge Hulk. And so I was like, okay, like I understand I need Hulk energy to be a mom, but tell me, like, what is the intention behind being a Hulk? And can I take you to a place that just feels like you have enough spaciousness? And so I was like, how about we go to outer space? So this is all through like a meditation. And I'm imagining taking myself to outer space, and then all of a sudden I turn into this little baby. And I'm freaking out because babies don't belong in space. And I'm realizing through just like this meditative experience is that actually there's a lot of fear inside of me. And that fear, fast forward like several therapy sessions, this wasn't one big download, but that fear just came from like, what if I don't get my needs met? And we're talking about just like sleep. Like, what if I don't get enough sleep? Am I going to be okay? Am I still going to do all the things that I can do? And if I can't do all the things I can do, I'm not going to be loved. Like, people aren't going to accept me. And then I had real anger. Like, I had anger towards, systematic beliefs like that I had inherited and were inside of me, that I had to be a certain way and had to mother a certain way. I had anger. Of course I had anger that toddlers were screaming at me, um and so I embraced that. Like, I was like, no, anger is okay. It's what I do with anger that is important. No, fear is okay. And so these were parts of me that I was disowning and didn't understand, but they had valuable information to give me, that my needs matter and that my anger is an advocate for me. And so those were parts of my own humanity that um, I really connected through. Um, yeah.
Mm. Now, how does that inform your work as a therapist?
Yeah. So working with trauma, I do work with shock trauma, but I really like working with complex trauma, and I don't think that we can really often say one or the other. I think, and I can get into that too if that feels helpful. But working with complex trauma, a lot of what happens is it's an environmental relational attachment failure to your needs. And so since these ruptured happened in relationship, they can often heal in relationship. And that can be relationship with yourself, but in the therapy space we have an opportunity to create relationship with our clients. Now, if I'm not in touch with my own, let's say, people pleasing or covert narcissism to be seen as good, then I might skip over, something that is coming up in the therapy space or in the energy field, just to make sure my client doesn't feel uncomfortable. Like, oh, I'm not going to point out there that that's a different thing that they said than earlier. Or if a client is, pushing some boundaries, then, maybe I'm not going to say anything because I need this client for, to hit my numbers or whatever it is. And so if we're not in touch with our own internal experience and our own humanity, and we're seeing ourselves in more of an objective way of like, am I a good or bad therapist? Or, am I hitting my numbers or not hitting my numbers? Then we're going to more likely objectify our clients in that way. And so if we don't have a clear understanding of like, okay, what is my intention behind this intervention? Why am I talking right now? What's coming up for me? What is this, what's coming up inside of me, mine, or is this my clients? And if it's how can I use what I'm noticing in my internal experience right now in this space?
Hmm. Now, when you're like, in your intro, you intentionally are doing a solo practice, which I think is great whenever anyone says, this is what I want out of my practice, and doesn't just follow, oh, I guess I'm supposed to do these things. In the same way that I think there's historically been a relationship ladder just in relationships, that you date someone and then you move in
Mm-hmm.
or get engaged and then you get married, buy a house, have kids, like that. A lot of that has changed and been disrupted, where people now are intentionally saying, here's what I want out of my romantic relationships. In the same way, I
Yeah.
think it's wonderful when people really say, this is what I want out of my business. This is how it serves me, it serves my family, it serves my community in a way that I genuinely want to impact the world, and I don't have to feel this need to scale and grow unnecessarily, unless that's what at some point I decide that I want for me, for my family, for my community. How did you decide that? Like, was it just, you kind of started the solo practice, it went well, and you said, I'm just going to keep it going like this? Or was it something kind of from the beginning, you really said, for a while, I just want to keep a solo, or forever, I want to keep a solo? How did you land
Yeah.
on a solo practice? This is what I want, and this is how I want to do it.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Because I do kind of want to address like why I describe myself as ordinary. But honestly, this was like a second career for me. I came from the wellness industry. And so I was working, and I use these terms masculine and feminine, and by no means mean gender or sex, but I was working in a very masculine industry where there was a lot of structure. There were a lot of outcomes and goals that we had to hit, and it was very objective, number focused, and that felt really good for me. That I really I did well in that, and I specifically went back to grad school just so when I'm sitting in the hospital rooms, I had credentials and letters behind my name, and Um, and so my first internship, and then I started as a therapist at this practice, was also very numbers driven. It was We were sending in spreadsheets of how many clients we saw. There was very direct. Um, your first session, you need to make sure you're scheduling 6 sessions out. Um, you're tracking how many sessions they came, and like kind of what your attrition rate was, and those were the check-ins. And what happened was I would take clients, in hindsight, I can say this, but at that time, I would take clients that, again, here's my um, covert narcissism is like, oh, sure, I could read a book and I could help them. Like, I'm going to hit my numbers this month. And, and honestly, it was like a real big tragedy that happened that kind of blew up my life, that then kind of swung me to another extreme of just like running my business in a very feminine way of like, okay, what do I feel? How do I feel with this person, with this client? I threw myself into so many experiential trainings like internal family systems and other complex trauma trainings like NARM, neuroaffective relational model, and just focused so much on myself, um, to an extreme, because then I lost track of like, okay, like there are some structures that I do need in place, and some of that masculine way of running a business is actually important. And so I would say that's kind of where I am now. And to me, embracing kind of the ordinary feels really important, because to me, that's the middle path. Running in the extreme of just going on my intuition isn't helpful, and running on the extreme of just going by objective and numbers isn't helpful. And so to me, just like the middle path for that, um, is being ordinary. It's like, okay, Jessica, maybe you do have to get an office right now in a corporate setting, and your big beautiful retreat center will happen, but just because it's not happening now, you have to take these steps. And so that's just kind of where I am now, of like really listening to myself, but also holding myself accountable with structure.
Mm. From new patients faced with an empty lobby and no idea where to find their therapist, to clinicians with a session running overtime and the doorbell ringing, some of the most anxiety ridden moments of a therapy appointment happen before a session even starts. This episode's sponsor, the Receptionist for iPad, helps you tackle some of that pre appointment apprehension. The Receptionist for iPad is an easy to use digital client check in system that helps your visitors check in securely to their appointments and notify their practitioners of their arrival via SMS, email, or your preferred channel. No more confusion, endless lobby checking, or having clients sign in on paper logbooks. Start a 14-day free trial of The Receptionist for iPad by going to thereceptionist.com/practice. Make sure to start your trial with that link, and you'll also get your first month free if you decide to sign up. Again, start your trial over at thereceptionist.com/practice. Now, are there ways that you do kind of ongoing check-ins with yourself in regards to what the business looks like and how it's feeling? Do you have any sort of systematic way that you assess that, or is it more intuitive?
Yeah, so for a long time, it was intuitive. Like, okay, yeah, I feel good. Like, I'm not burning out. I have the spaciousness to support my family, and I have the income to support my family. And um, and then things happen. Like, I think that's the important thing of like life will continually happen, and you have to have that flexibility and that structure. And I think that's what the masculine can bring is kind of that sense of external security. And because I had leaned so far feminine, I didn't have that. And so what I've brought back into my practice are spreadsheets and goals. And I just break it into, kind of what are the projects that I'm working on and making sure I allocate some time to those. And then also just like kind of the backbone of my business right now is seeing clients. Okay, what do I have in place right now for seeing clients? And really assessing myself and you know, I can raise my rates. Look at these trainings I've done. Look how long I've been in the field. Like this is okay. And um again, like this office example, like I can take an office in a corporate setting. It's okay. Seeing people in person is important to the work that I'm doing. And I'm trying to think what else that I've really held myself accountable. Yeah, I think as far as just like myself, I have ongoing therapy, I have ongoing consultation groups or just personal consultation that I do kind of for that internal piece.
hmm Now, I think a lot of people tend to fall on one side or the other. They're hyper organized and, over the top with their practice, or they're so intuitive that they, drop the ball, but they feel, good about things. How do you find that balance? Because both sides have their strengths and their areas that could use some help. It sounds like you're really finding that middle path between the two. What's been helpful to honor both sides of that, and kind of pulling the best into your practice?
Yeah, I think it's important like the questions and that we ask ourselves. Like I'll just bring in a budget, for example. It might seem super basic to some people to like have a budget of fixed expenses and variable expenses. Um, but to some people, it's like, no, like I have a bank account, it has enough money in it, and my bills get paid. Um, and so I'm not, no right or wrong, but what I have experienced is like things things happen. We don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And so the more that you know, not to an extreme, like, I think it's okay to travel and I think it's okay to go out to lunch, but when with a budget, it's helpful. But there in somebody who's super intuitive and just wants to put money, there's like a protest to that. And I think you honor that protest and get to understand it and like what is that? And oftentimes it's like probably some feeling of like um I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough to run a budget. That brings up those feelings inside of me, so I stay away from it. It's like, okay, well, are those feelings of you that we could work through? Because a budget is important. And then somebody who's like super, objective and kind of really organized, maybe. You ask a question like on your consultation, like what makes your heart come alive? And that might be really unsettling for someone. Like, how are you feeling in your practice right now? That could be really unsettling for someone, but super important because if we're not tuning into ourselves and our own internal experience, and that can lead to to burnout because we will be super productive, and that only that productive part of us brings our worth. And when we dry out the resources of productivity, we fall flat and go into more of a depressive state. And that's all we know. So getting in touch with more complexity of who you are and how you're feeling, and I think that could be really empowering for that type as well.
Mm. Now, I want to go back to the kind of having the humanity in your, not just your practice, but in your life. How do you determine for yourself what things really light you up, whether that's your practice or in your life or just finding that joy, reminding yourself of that humanity? So, how do you find that? And then how do you keep yourself prioritizing those things? Because I think we can say, hey, I know it's good for me to meditate, to go for walks with friends, to work out, to blog for my business, whatever the things are that we know are going to move the needle forward for what we find to have a more satisfying life. We can know
Mm-hmm.
all that, and then sometimes we don't do it. So first, like, how do you figure out what lights you up, and then how do you also make sure that you do those things?
Yeah. Um, I think what I've noticed is my willingness to hold both, like to hold both loss and darkness can be really empowering and kind of just bring into clarity some of those lighter moments. Like parenthood is just it's such a good example right now because I think when I got on here I was like, yeah, we just got through the tornado of the morning,
Hmm.
and that's what it can feel like most days. But also like if I kind of just like let go, like the interview with Joe is going to be okay. Like you're going to say what you're going to say, and like the sessions today are going to happen. But like what's and if I can loosen up a little bit and feel okay with just the moment, then then I can be with my daughters and the silliness of the morning, and I can be with them and feel really good about like just showing up present. Um, so I think what lights me up is when I'm willing to just like see the role that I'm playing in my present moment and taking ownership of that. Like, gosh, I'm putting so much pressure on myself right now of something that's not going to happen. And I can feel confident, like I'm going to be okay.
Mm.
And that doesn't just come from like telling myself I'm going to be okay. I mean, that comes from $1,000 of therapy, taking solo trips by myself, meditating, like all of that stuff is important. Um, but it is in those moments that when I'm willing to hold both, like it can feel really light.
Hmm. Does it ever, so even just as you just listed those things that it takes to kind of get to this point, at least what I see with people that end up seeming more grounded than myself, that there's almost like a return back to the simple where they say, yeah, it was good for me to do all that therapy. It was good for me to take those solo trips. It was good for me to put myself first, whatever the things were. And then oftentimes they come back to, and I've realized I don't need to achieve my way into wellness anymore. That like
Mhm.
there's a settling into who they are, flawed or having disruptive thoughts, and that illusion of you know enlightenment, we might call it. That I mean that's kind of a loaded term, but that illusion of inner peace that's never going to go away. They often
Yeah.
realize that it's not something that is achieved and then sustains. It's something that is, it comes and sometimes it goes, and they notice why it goes, and then they're just okay with not achieving their way into this inner peace. um does that
Hmm.
resonate with you, or is that something that you notice or see?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so common. I mean, even for me, like when I'm having a great day, like I don't want to have a bad day ever again.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that I notice that even with my clients, it's like, okay, if I work through this, I will never have to feel angry again. Okay, if I work through this, I will never have to feel loss again. And and I think that like reckoning with that reality that that is just not the case and building capacity for the uncertainty and the unknowns, but kind of also the certain like we're pretty certain that we're going to have some challenging times. that can be really freeing, I think. And so um, I do think it is kind of, you do feel this like ease and kind of this simplicity of like, I do this walk, Joe. Okay, now I'm getting weird, but I do this walk on my neighborhood and it just feels so good. I say, Jessica, I am human. Maple tree, you are tree. Grass, you
Mm,
are grass. And just like that differentiation feels so good. And I do this thing with my partner and he hates it. And so just a warning to other people, but I say, you are going to die, not in like a way of
mm,
scaring you, but I do think these are just parts of our humanity that are just being human. Like you're going to be mad again. You're going to be sad again. You're going to lose somebody, something's not going to go right. And that's okay. Like if you can be willing to be connected to those parts of you, like you're going to feel a lot more free and you're going to feel more light and you're going to feel more joy. And on the
mm,
flip side, if you allow yourself to feel that pleasure, to feel that joy, um like I promise you, you can rest, you can still be sad again, like, so yeah, I
I
yeah.
think, what's interesting is I had a friend, I was in this group called Front Row Dads for a while. And
Mhm.
we had these like small groups and we were all dads. Their tagline was family men with businesses, not businessmen with families. And so it's all these
Mm.
kind of business guys that also like really wanted to be great dads. So I was in this small
Mhm.
group with like two other guys, and one guy had a post-it note next to his computer that he saw every day that said, your kids are going to die someday. Imagine being at their funeral. And it's so
Mm.
morbid, but it's also like, man, I had during an ayahuasca experience, an experience of one of my daughters like dying, and it's this whole story. But like
Mhm.
to come out of that and feel the pain and it feel real that she was completely dead, and to come home
Mhm.
and give her a hug and get to be her dad, it's like,
Yeah.
I get what so many parents don't get, that to like see their kid after they've fully experienced the weight of their child dying. And for many
Mhm.
people, that would be like, why would you put yourself through that with ayahuasca? But it's like, it wasn't what I went into it as my intention. But I love that you have that conversation. To me, that's so important that, like, my parents right now are alive, and they
Mhm.
live a couple miles from my house. And, I have them over a couple times a week. And I, I know that they're going to die at some point. And my therapist helped me realize that that's always going to be painful, because a lot of what I was doing was, like, if they invited us over for dinner and it was inconvenient, I'd be like, well, we have to go because someday they're going to die. But then it's
Right.
like, but I'm living in like spitefulness, then like, I don't want to
Mhm.
do this. I'd rather go out with
Mhm.
my friends tonight. And it was like I was trying to preemptively mitigate my sadness when they eventually die. But it's always
Yeah.
going to be hard. So
Yep.
I love that you bring that in, and I think that, whether or not your partner resonates with it, I think that's important for you and for me and for others to think through these tools that for us make sense. Jessica, the last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Hmm. Yeah, I would just invite them to embrace their own humanity and allow themselves to and belong to themselves and know that they are worthy of their own love and that, like real safety comes from a willingness of not abandoning or running away from your own self.
Mm, so awesome. Well, if people want to connect with you, if they want to follow your work, where should we send them?
So my practice name is Complex Human. I do spell human interestingly, HUMXN. And so complexhumancounseling.com is my website. And I have some like public resources and like my bookshelf on there. And then I am on Instagram sporadically at Complex Human.
Mm, so awesome. Well, we will link to that in the show notes also. Thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Oh, thanks for this combo, Joe. It's lovely.
So I'd love to know what you're going to do to take action from this. Now, we don't always have to take action like productivity, but when I learn something, I have found for myself that if I do something with that information, it could be journal it, it could be put in my calendar a month from now to say, hey, how you doing on remembering you're human? It could be as simple as that. It could be that you think about what brings you life. As I often bring up, improv for me gives me so much life. I love it so much. On Tuesday, just the other day when we had improv, this lady Lisa, who's our like head of the group, she created this whole new kind of format for a scene, and gosh, for 2 hours, I was laughing so hard. Like, those are the things that bring me back, and no matter how we find those flow states, the improv, the meditation, the running, for some people, for me, that's definitely not a flow state. That's a torture state. But do that just a little bit more. Just do it a little more. Step into it, do some experiments, and I would love to hear how it goes for you. The sponsor for this episode is The Receptionist. The Receptionist is so amazing in helping you out to be able to get to that next level, to be able to just have the help that you need. And so head on over to thereceptionist.com to help you be able to have a better check-in process for your community, for when people come in. I know when I had my group practice, someone would walk in the door and we didn't know if it was my client or someone else's. The receptionist for the iPad is so perfect to inform your clinicians when their clients show up. So make sure you check out thereceptionist.com/Joe. And thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have an amazing day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music. And this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.